What would you do if the most dangerous man in Chicago slammed a piece of paper onto your table and offered you $1 million just to read it out loud? For Victoria, a waitress drowning in her late father's medical debts, it sounded like a cruel, twisted joke. Dominic Castellano, the ruthless head of the Castellano crime family, was known for breaking people, not giving away fortunes. But when Victoria picked up the faded parchment, the words she read didn't just win her the money. They stopped the heart of every hardened criminal in the room. This is the story of $1 million dare that changed the underworld forever. Keep listening, because the terrifying truth hidden in that letter, nobody saw it coming. The air in the VIP room of the Obsidian Club was thick with the scent of expensive Cuban cigars, spilled aged bourbon, and unfiltered violence. Victoria Hayes kept her eyes down, balancing a silver tray of crystal tumblers. As a waitress in the city's most notorious underground speakeasy, the first rule of survival was simple: be invisible. You do not look at the men in the tailored suits. You do not listen to their whispered threats. And you certainly do not speak. Tonight, the tension in the room was suffocating. Sitting at the head of the heavy mahogany table was Dominic Castellano. At 32, Dominic was a terrifying juxtaposition of old-world royalty and modern-day savagery. He had sharp aristocratic features, piercing charcoal grey eyes, and a reputation that made the Chicago Police Department look the other way. Surrounding him were 5 of his capos, men with scarred knuckles and cold stares, along with 3 rival bosses from the West Side who looked like they were sweating bullets. Victoria silently approached the table, deftly replacing empty glasses with fresh pours of Macallan. As she reached for an empty tumbler near Dominic, he slammed a heavy, calloused hand flat on the table. Victoria flinched, pulling her hand back just in time. Beneath Dominic's hand was a crumpled piece of heavy, yellowed paper. It looked old, almost ancient. 3 weeks. Dominic's voice was a low, lethal baritone that instantly silenced the murmurs in the room. He slowly dragged his gaze across the men sitting opposite him. 3 weeks I have given you to decode the intercepted courier's message. I am surrounded by millionaires, tactical geniuses, and the so-called brains of the Chicago syndicate, and yet none of you can tell me who ordered the hit on my shipping yards. Boss, with respect, mumbled Leo, Dominic's heavily tattooed underboss, shifting uncomfortably. It's not just a code, it's gibberish. We brought in a cryptography professor from Northwestern University. Even he said it's a string of dead symbols. It's unreadable. Dominic let out a dark, mocking laugh that sent a shiver down Victoria's spine. He picked up the letter, waving it lazily in the air. Unreadable, Dominic sneered, his eyes flashing with cruel amusement. He suddenly turned in his chair, his dark eyes locking onto Victoria. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. You, Dominic commanded softly. What's your name? Victoria, sir, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the jazz music filtering in from the main club. Victoria, he repeated, tasting the name. He tossed the crumpled letter onto the silver tray she was holding. It landed with a soft, mocking thud next to the crystal glasses. I'll make a wager. Since my men are completely useless, let's open the floor. I will give $1 million in cash tonight to anyone who can read this letter. The men in the room chuckled nervously. Leo rubbed his jaw. Dominic, come on, don't play with the girl. I'm not playing, Dominic said, leaning back and crossing his arms, his eyes never leaving Victoria's pale face. $1 million. If you can read it, waitress, you walk out of here a rich woman. If you can't, you confirm what I already know, that everyone in this room is equally illiterate. The men laughed louder this time, a cruel, mocking sound. They looked at Victoria with pity and disdain, a simple waitress in a stained apron, clutching a serving tray like a shield. Victoria swallowed hard. She looked down at the paper. It was covered in strange, jagged script. It wasn't standard English, nor was it Italian or Russian. It looked like a chaotic mix of symbols and letters. To the Northwestern professor, it might have been dead symbols. But to Victoria, it was a ghost from her past. before her father fell into crippling gambling debt, the very debt she was now working off at this club. He was an antiquities dealer who specialized in Renaissance-era espionage. He had spent his life obsessed with 16th-century Venetian ciphers, specifically the Balazzo cipher, a highly complex cryptographic system used by the Doges of Venice to hide assassination orders. He used to make Victoria decode them at the kitchen table for fun when she was a teenager. She stared at the paper. It wasn't gibberish. It was a variation of the Balazzo cipher, layered over an old Sicilian dialect. "Well," Dominic prompted, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Nothing? What a shame. You can get back to serving drinks now, Victoria." "It's a shipping manifest," Victoria said. The room went dead silent. The mocking laughter cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. Dominic's smirk vanished. He leaned forward, the wood of his chair groaning under his weight. "What did you say?" Victoria's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to look the Mafia boss dead in the eyes. "It's not a standard letter. It's written in a 16th-century Venetian cipher, combined with a regional Sicilian dialect. It's a shipping manifest." Leo stood up, his hand hovering near his jacket pocket. "She's lying. She's just trying to guess." "I'm not guessing," Victoria said, her voice steadying. She picked the paper off her tray. The words were decoding themselves in her mind, the familiar patterns leaping off the page. It reads, "The cargo arrives on the Blood Moon. Pier 47, 3 containers of iron, 2 of snow." She paused, her eyes widening as she translated the final, signed line at the bottom. Her breath hitched. She looked up at Dominic, realizing exactly what she had stumbled into. "Keep reading," Dominic ordered, his voice dangerously soft. His eyes were wide, calculating. He knew she wasn't faking. "Read the signature." Victoria swallowed the lump in her throat. It says, "Let the Wraith burn with his ships. Signed, Gabriel." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed down on the room. Gabriel was Dominic's younger brother, his own flesh and blood. The implications hung in the air like a lit stick of dynamite. The men in the room exchanged terrified sideways glances. Victoria had just revealed a betrayal of the highest order, an assassination plot orchestrated by a Castellano against a Castellano. Dominic didn't yell. He didn't pull a gun. Instead, he stared at Victoria with an intensity that made her skin burn. The cold mockery was gone, replaced by a dark, predatory fascination. "Leo," Dominic said quietly, never breaking eye contact with Victoria. "Yeah, boss," Leo whispered, looking physically sick. "Go to the vault," Dominic commanded. "Get the girl her $1 million." He stood up slowly, towering over Victoria, his proximity radiating heat and danger, and tell the manager she's off the clock. Victoria belongs to me now. The heavy canvas duffel bag hit the Persian rug with a muted, heavy thud. It was the sound of $1 million in unmarked $100 bills. To anyone else, it would be the sound of freedom. To Victoria, standing in the dimly lit back office of the Obsidian Club, it sounded like a vault door slamming shut. Dominic Castellano stood by the mahogany desk, pouring himself a neat glass of bourbon. He didn't offer her one. His imposing frame seemed to swallow the light in the room. "Your father was Arthur Hayes," Dominic stated. It wasn't a question. In the 15 minutes since Victoria had decoded the fatal letter, Dominic's men had already pulled her entire life history. A disgraced antiquities dealer who owed my family $400,000 in gambling debts before his heart gave out. You've been working double shifts for 2 years trying to pay off the VIG. Victoria kept her eyes glued to the duffel bag. The debt is paid now, with interest. I want to take the rest of the money and leave. Leave? Dominic chuckled, a dark, velvety sound that vibrated in the quiet room. He took a slow sip of his drink, his charcoal grey eyes burning into her. Victoria, you just stood in front of the most dangerous men in Chicago and read a 16th century Venetian cipher created by Giovan Battista Bellazzo. You revealed that my own brother, Gabriel, is conspiring to kill me and burn my shipping empire to the ground. You don't get to just leave. Panic, sharp and icy, flared in her chest. "We made a deal. You said—" "I said you'd walk out of that room a rich woman," Dominic interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. Suddenly he was standing inches from her, the scent of expensive sandalwood and danger wrapping around her. He reached out, his knuckles lightly grazing the line of her jaw. She shivered, unable to step back. "And you are. That money is yours. Your father's debt is wiped clean. But you belong to the Castellano family now. You're my cryptographer." "I'm a waitress," she breathed, her heart hammering wildly against his proximity. "Not anymore." Dominic stepped back, the brief moment of physical contact leaving Victoria's skin buzzing. "Leo!" The heavy oak door swung open, and the tattooed underboss stepped in, looking grim. "Cars are ready, boss." "Grab the girl's money," Dominic ordered. He didn't look back at Victoria as he buttoned his suit jacket. "We're going to the Lake Forest estate, and Leo, if anyone asks where the waitress went, tell them she took the midnight train to nowhere." The drive north along Lakeshore Drive was suffocatingly silent. Victoria sat in the back of the armored Cadillac Escalade, sandwiched between the heavy leather doors and Dominic's imposing presence. Outside, the glittering Chicago skyline gave way to dark, winding roads flanked by towering iron gates. When they arrived at the Castellano estate, a sprawling, Gothic-style mansion, hidden behind acres of dense woods and armed guards, Victoria realized the true extent of her golden trap. She was escorted to a guest suite larger than her entire apartment. It had silk sheets, a marble soaking tub, and a balcony overlooking a private cliffside. But when she tried the heavy oak door after the guards left, it was locked from the outside. She was a millionaire, and she was a prisoner. At 2 a.m., the lock clicked. Victoria bolted upright in the massive bed, clutching the silk duvet to her chest. The door swung open to reveal Dominic. He had shed his suit jacket and tie, his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a sliver of an intricate, dark tattoo on his chest. In one hand, he held a thick leather binder. "Get up," he commanded softly. "We have work to do." He led her down a labyrinth of dimly lit, mahogany-paneled hallways into a massive underground study. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and gunpowder. A massive table in the center was covered in surveillance photos, shipping manifests, and a dozen more intercepted letters, all written in the same jagged, archaic script as the first. "Gabriel has been busy," Dominic said, tossing the binder onto the table. His jaw was clenched, a muscle feathering near his ear. Victoria could see the raw, suppressed rage beneath his calm exterior. Betrayal by a brother was a wound that bled inward. "He's been communicating with the Rossi syndicate for months. My analysts thought these were just coded financial ledgers. I need to know everything he's planning." Victoria cautiously approached the table. The sheer volume of documents was overwhelming. "Dominic, this isn't just a simple substitution cipher. Balazzo's method uses reciprocal alphabets and a secret keyword. The only reason I could read the first one was because the keyword, Blood Moon, was hidden in the regional Sicilian dialect at the top of the page. If he changed the keyword for these, then you find the new keyword," Dominic said, moving to stand directly behind her. He leaned over her shoulder, his hands resting flat on the table on either side of her, effectively trapping her against the edge. His breath stirred the hair at the nape of her neck. "I don't accept failure, Victoria. You have a brilliant mind. Use it." For the next 4 hours, they worked in intense electric silence. Victoria pored over the documents, her mind slipping into the familiar, comforting rhythm of pattern recognition her father had taught her. Dominic stayed by her side, fetching her black coffee, watching her pen scratch frantically across notepads. He was a ruthless killer, yet he watched her intellect with a dark, burning reverence that made her stomach flutter. "Here!" Victoria suddenly gasped, her finger slamming down on a piece of parchment dated 2 days ago. The dialect shift. He's using quotes from Dante's Inferno as the cipher keys. Dominic's eyes sharpened. "Translate it." Victoria's eyes darted across the page, her lips moving silently as she broke the code. The color rapidly drained from her face. "Victoria, what does it say?" Dominic's voice was a low growl. "It's not just the shipping yards, Dominic," she whispered, looking up at him, terrified. "The shipments at Pier 47. They were a distraction. The real hit. It's happening tomorrow night, at the annual charity gala at the Drake Hotel." She swallowed hard, pointing to the final translated line. "Gabriel isn't just trying to cripple your business. He's planning to slaughter the entire family commission in one room. He's going to burn the Drake to the ground with you inside it." Dominic stared at the paper. The silence in the study grew heavy, lethal, and absolute. When he finally looked back at Victoria, the man she saw wasn't just a mob boss. He was a predator who had just caught the scent of blood. "Tomorrow night," Dominic murmured, a chilling, terrifying smile slowly curving his lips. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping a smudge of ink from Victoria's cheek. The tenderness of the gesture was violently at odds with the murder in his eyes. "Well done, Miyakara, my dear. It seems you just saved my life." He pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing a number. "Leo, wake the men. Call every capo in the city. Gabriel wants a war at the Drake. We're going to give him a massacre." He hung up and looked at Victoria, his eyes dark with a new, possessive intensity. "And you, Victoria, you're coming with me." The afternoon sun barely pierced the heavy velvet drapes of Victoria's gilded prison. She sat at the edge of the massive mahogany bed, staring blankly at the object draped across the mattress. It was a gown, not just any gown, a sweeping, floor-length creation of emerald green silk that looked like liquid glass. Next to it sat a velvet box containing a diamond collar necklace that cost more than her father had earned in his entire lifetime. "The gala begins at 8. Dominic's voice resonated from the doorway. He leaned against the heavy oak frame, already dressed in a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders. He looked every inch the ruthless king of the Chicago underworld. Victoria stood up, her arms crossed defensively over her simple cotton sweater. "I decoded the message, Dominic. I told you where and when the hit is happening. Why do I have to go? I'm not a soldier. I'm a waitress." "You are my eyes," Dominic said, stepping into the room. The air instantly felt heavier, charged with the dangerous, crackling energy he carried everywhere. Gabriel is arrogant, but he isn't stupid. If he plans to slaughter the commission tonight, he won't just walk in with guns blazing. There will be signals, micro-expressions, visual codes, a sequence of events designed to coordinate his men without drawing attention. You understand patterns, Victoria. You see the invisible. He stopped mere inches from her. He reached out, his long fingers brushing the soft silk of the emerald gown before his gaze drifted up to her face. "Put it on. We leave in an hour." When Victoria finally descended the grand sweeping staircase of the Lake Forest estate, the mansion's heavy silence seemed to shatter. Dominic was waiting at the bottom, talking in hushed, urgent tones with Leo. As Victoria's silver heel clicked against the marble, both men looked up. Leo's jaw visibly dropped, but Dominic simply went utterly still. The emerald silk clung to Victoria's curves, the deep V neckline elegant yet daring, the diamond collar resting against her collarbones like a brand of ownership. She felt exposed, terrified, and dangerously alive. Dominic's charcoal eyes darkened as he slowly ascended the first 2 steps to meet her. He didn't offer a compliment. In his world, words were cheap. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a tiny, flesh-colored earpiece. "Turn your head," he murmured. Victoria obeyed, her breath hitching as his warm fingers brushed against her ear, sliding the device into place. "Keep the channel open," he whispered, his lips grazing her temple. "If you see a pattern, if you decode a single thing out of place, you tell me immediately. Tonight, Victoria, your brilliant mind is the only thing keeping us both breathing." The drive down Michigan Avenue was a blur of neon and tension. The Drake Hotel, a historic beacon of Gold Coast luxury, was swarming with valets, paparazzi, and the city's elite. But as Dominic's armored motorcade pulled up, the atmosphere shifted. The valet stood a little straighter. The doorman subtly checked their surroundings. Dominic offered Victoria his arm. "Smile, mia cara," he instructed softly, leading her onto the red carpet. "You are on the arm of a Castellano. Act like you own the world, and they will believe you do." They entered the grand ballroom, a sprawling masterpiece of crystal chandeliers, gold leaf, and towering floral arrangements. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner. To the untrained eye, it was a gathering of wealthy philanthropists. To Victoria, instructed by Dominic's earlier briefings, it was a viper's nest. Half the men in the room were capos from rival families, the Rossi syndicate from the South Side, the Moretti brothers from New York. And then, stepping out from the crowd with a crystal champagne flute in his hand, was Gabriel Castellano. He was the mirror image of Dominic, yet entirely devoid of his older brother's cold, calculated control. Gabriel had a reckless, hungry energy. His smile was dazzling, but his eyes were entirely dead. "Brother," Gabriel projected, opening his arms wide as he approached. The surrounding crowd subtly parted, giving the two Mafia royalty a wide berth. Gabriel's eyes slid off Dominic and landed directly on Victoria. A slow, predatory smirk spread across his face. "And who is this absolute vision? You didn't mention you were bringing a muse to the slaughter. I mean, the gala." Dominic's grip on Victoria's waist tightened, his thumb pressing possessively into her side. "Victoria is a private consultant, Gabriel. She has a talent for reading old histories, revealing dead secrets." Gabriel's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression that Victoria caught instantly. "Is that so?" Gabriel murmured, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. "Well, Victoria, I hope you enjoy the fireworks tonight. Chicago is so beautiful when it burns." For the next 2 hours, Victoria existed in a state of hyper-vigilance. She stayed anchored to Dominic's side as he navigated the treacherous waters of mob politics, making polite conversation with men who had likely ordered hits on him the week before. Through it all, Victoria's mind raced, scanning the ballroom. She wasn't looking at the silk ties or the diamond Rolexes. She was looking for the cipher. "The cargo arrives on the blood moon. Pier 47, 3 containers of iron, 2 of snow." That was the original message, the distraction. The Inferno translation she had cracked last night warned of the real hit here. But how? "Talk to me, Victoria." Dominic's low voice crackled softly in her right ear. He was currently nodding at a state senator, not even looking in her direction. "Nothing yet," she whispered, pretending to sip her champagne. "Gabriel is working the room. He's spoken to 3 of the Rossi capos, but nothing overt. Keep looking." "None star." Victoria moved toward the edge of the ballroom, leaning against a marble pillar to get a better vantage point. She watched the waitstaff circling with trays of hors d'oeuvres. She watched the string quartet. She watched the exits. Then she saw it. It wasn't a visual cue. It was structural. Victoria closed her eyes, visualizing the Palazzo cipher grid she had drawn in Dominic's study. The cipher relied on overlapping triangles to dictate the sequence of the letters. She opened her eyes and looked at the placement of Gabriel's most loyal men. There were 6 of them scattered around the room. If she drew a line connecting their positions, it formed a perfect, massive triangle across the ballroom floor. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She scanned the room again. The Rossi Caipos, the men Gabriel had allied with, were subtly moving. They were forming an inverted triangle, intersecting with Gabriel's men. The Star of David, the ancient alchemical symbol for fire. "Dominic," Victoria breathed, turning her head slightly so her mouth was shielded by her shoulder. "Dominic, it's spatial. The room. Look at the room." "Explain." His voice came back instantly, cold and sharp. "Gabriel's men and the Rossi men. They've taken positions. They're forming intersecting triangles across the ballroom. The alchemical symbol for fire. In the Inferno text, the 7th circle of hell is the rain of fire." She spoke rapidly, the pieces locking together in her brilliant mind. "They have crossfire angles on every single exit. Dominic, they aren't going to bomb the building. It's an execution grid. If anyone stands in the center of the room, You'll be cut to pieces. Dominic didn't hesitate. Leo, he barked into his own hidden comms. Execution grid. Move the VIPs to the perimeter. Now. Across the room, Victoria saw Gabriel step up to the main podium, tapping a silver spoon against a crystal microphone. The high-pitched chime cut through the low hum of the gala. The string quartet stopped playing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gabriel announced, his voice echoing off the gold-leafed ceiling. "Family, friends, thank you for gathering tonight to celebrate our collective success." Victoria watched in horror as Gabriel reached into his tuxedo jacket. The men forming the intersecting triangle simultaneously slipped their hands beneath their lapels. "Dominic, the apex of the triangle," Victoria whispered frantically. "The center point is—" She traced the invisible lines with her eyes. They all converged on one spot, the chandelier directly above Dominic's head. "Dominic, move!" she screamed, abandoning all pretense. She lunged forward, her emerald dress flashing as she sprinted across the polished marble floor. Gabriel pulled a suppressed submachine gun from his jacket. "To new management!" he roared. Victoria slammed into Dominic a fraction of a second before the deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the elegance of the Drake Hotel. The massive crystal chandelier above them exploded, showering the ballroom in a lethal rain of glass and fire, plunging the room into chaotic, screaming darkness. The world did not just go dark. It ceased to exist in any recognizable form, instantly replaced by a deafening, apocalyptic roar. The massive brass and crystal chandelier, a century-old fixture of the Drake Hotel weighing over 2 tons, impacted the polished marble floor, precisely where Dominic had been standing, a fraction of a second prior. The sound was apocalyptic, a screeching, metallic tearing, followed by the explosive shattering of 10,000 pieces of crystal. Razor-sharp shrapnel exploded outward in a lethal, glittering wave. But Victoria didn't feel the glass. She didn't feel the crushing impact of the debris. Instead, she felt the jarring, breath-stealing impact of the floor as a heavy, solid mass tackled her to the ground. Dominic had twisted mid-air the moment she slammed into him, absorbing the brutal momentum of their fall and rolling so that his broad back took the brunt of the shockwave. He covered her completely. His large, calloused hand clamped down over the back of her head, burying her face into the curve of his neck and the ruined silk of his tie as the air above them literally shredded. For 10 agonizing seconds, the ballroom was a nightmare of continuous, deafening noise. The initial crash was immediately swallowed by the staccato, thunderous cracks of automatic gunfire. The smell of ancient plaster, pulverized marble, spilled champagne, and the sharp metallic tang of cordite flooded Victoria's senses. Panic, cold and absolute, threatened to drown her. But then, beneath the roaring chaos, she felt something else. Dominic's heartbeat. Pressed tight against his chest, she could feel the slow, terrifyingly steady rhythm of it. He wasn't panicking. He was calculating. "Victoria!" His voice was a harsh, ragged vibration directly against her ear. He didn't yell, but the lethal frequency of his tone cut straight through the gunfire. "Are you hit? Tell me right now." "No," she gasped, her hands convulsively gripping the lapels of his tuxedo jacket. Her emerald silk dress was torn at the knees, her hair wild and dusted with plaster, but she was entirely intact. Dominic shifted his weight just enough to draw the matte black Glock 19 from his shoulder holster. The darkness in the room was absolute, choked with dust and smoke, illuminated only by the frantic, strobe-like flashes of muzzle fire from the perimeter of the room. "Leo!" Dominic barked into his hidden earpiece, ignoring the screams of the fleeing gala attendees scrambling towards the barricaded exits. "Boss, we're pinned down behind the main mahogany bar." Leo's voice crackled back, laced with heavy static and the distinct sound of bullets chewing through wood. "Rossi's men have the east and west exits barricaded. They're firing blind into the center of the room. We can't see a damn thing in this smoke. We're fish in a barrel." "Hold your position," Dominic ordered coldly. He looked down at Victoria, the ambient flashes of gunfire catching the ruthless, predatory glint in his charcoal eyes. The polished billionaire was gone, The monster of the Chicago syndicate had slipped his leash. "We need to move, now!" He grabbed her by the waist, his grip iron-tight, and dragged her behind the pulverized, smoking remains of a massive fluted pillar, just as a spray of bullets stitched a line across the marble where they had been lying. Victoria pressed her back against the cold, shattered stone, dragging oxygen into her burning lungs. Her entire body was trembling uncontrollably, the adrenaline threatening to short-circuit her brain. But as she stared out into the pitch-black void of the ballroom, something shifted inside her. The terrified waitress from the speakeasy vanished, replaced by the daughter of Arthur Hayes, the prodigy who lived in numbers, sequences, and ciphers, the Star of David, the alchemical symbol for fire, the intersecting triangles. "Dominic," Victoria breathed, her voice suddenly devoid of hysteria. She reached out in the dark, her fingers finding his forearm. "The grid, the execution grid, is still active." Dominic froze, his gun raised, his body coiled like a lethal spring. "Explain." "Gabriel isn't just letting them shoot blindly. This is a coordinated sweep," Victoria said rapidly, the math snapping together in her mind with terrifying clarity. "Before the lights went out, I saw their positions. The Rossi Capos formed the base of an inverted triangle. Gabriel's loyalists formed the upright, the triangle. It's an overlapping kill zone. But in the dark, they can't see each other either, which means they have to follow a strictly timed spatial algorithm to avoid friendly fire." Dominic turned his head toward her. He didn't question her logic. In his world, hesitation meant death, and he had already decided to trust her with his life. "How does the algorithm move?" Victoria closed her eyes. She didn't need to see the room. She had already built a perfect, three-dimensional model of it in her eidetic memory. She saw the gold-leafed ceiling, the ice sculptures, the catering tables, and the exact coordinates of every killer in the room. "It's a tightening noose," she whispered, opening her eyes. "They are pivoting inward every 30 seconds, advancing 2 paces, and sweeping a 45-degree angle. They are clearing the room sector by sector, working their way to the center to confirm your kill." Dominic checked his magazine by touch. 15 rounds. "Where is the closest threat?" "The Rossi man who was stationed at 10 o'clock, near the Swan ice sculptures," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a dead calm. "If he followed the 30-second sweep protocol, he is currently 12 yards to our immediate left, using the overturned caviar station as cover." Dominic didn't say a word. He reached out, his hand sliding down her arm to intertwine his fingers with hers. The contrast between the cold violence of the room and the burning heat of his touch sent a shockwave through her system. "Step exactly where I step," he commanded in a whisper. They became ghosts in the darkness. Dominic moved with a terrifying, liquid grace, making absolutely no sound as he navigated the debris-strewn floor. Victoria followed, biting the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out as a rogue shard of glass sliced into her bare heel. She had kicked off her silver stilettos the moment she tackled him. 30 seconds. Victoria squeezed Dominic's hand. "Now, he's reloading or pivoting." Dominic stepped out from the cover of the shadows. He didn't aim. He simply raised the Glock and fired twice in rapid succession. The blinding muzzle flash illuminated the terrified face of a Rossi hitman just as the bullets took him in the chest. The man crumpled backward over the catering table, his assault rifle clattering uselessly to the floor. The sound of Dominic's gun gave away their position. A hail of bullets immediately rained down on the catering station, shredding the linen and sending silver platters flying. "Move!" Dominic grunted, wrapping his arm around Victoria's waist and literally lifting her off her feet as he dove behind the raised dais of the string quartet. "That was the base of the triangle," Victoria panted, her forehead resting against the polished wood of a discarded cello. "Gabriel's men are the apex. They'll adjust their sweep towards the sound of your gun. 2 men coming from 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock. "Distances?" Dominic asked, his breathing perfectly even, his eyes scanning the impenetrable dark. 18 yards, right side, behind the velvet curtain of the east window, Victoria calculated, her mind visualizing the geometric lines converging on their location. The other is flanking through the kitchen double doors. Wait for the pivot. Wait. The seconds ticked by like hours. The air was suffocating, thick with dust and the metallic scent of fresh blood. Victoria could feel the heat radiating from Dominic's body, his chest pressed firmly against her shoulder. He was a weapon, and she was the one aiming him. It was a dark, intoxicating power that completely eclipsed her fear. 5 paces. Right, Victoria whispered. Dominic surged upward over the lip of the dais. Crack, crack. A heavy thud echoed from the velvet curtains. One down. "Kitchen doors!" Victoria yelled. A shadow burst through the swinging doors, the silhouette of a submachine gun rising. Dominic didn't have the angle. Without thinking, Victoria grabbed the heavy wooden neck of the discarded cello and shoved it violently across the polished floor. It slid through the darkness and slammed directly into the hitman's shins. The man stumbled, his gun firing wildly into the ceiling. That fraction of a second was all Dominic needed. A single shot rang out, and the shadow dropped. For the next 4 minutes, Victoria and Dominic executed a flawless, terrifying dance of death. Guided entirely by Victoria's whispered coordinates and her brilliant spatial tracking, Dominic dismantled the execution grid piece by bloody piece. He was the executioner, swift and merciless, but she was the architect. She mapped the blind spots, calculated the reload times, and anticipated the enemy's movements before they even made them. They moved in perfect, lethal sync. Every time Dominic fired, the flashing light revealed Victoria right beside him, her ruined emerald dress glowing like a beacon of defiance in the wreckage. Suddenly a loud mechanical grinding noise echoed from the basement. The emergency backup generators violently roared to life. Amber security lights flickered, buzzing loudly before bathing the ruined grand ballroom in a sickly yellow-orange glow. The sudden illumination felt more jarring than the darkness. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and drenched in finality. Dominic and Victoria stood near the center of the room. Surrounding them was a scene of utter devastation. The walls were chewed to pieces by gunfire, the ceiling was raining fine white plaster, and the floor was slick with blood and shattered crystal. Leo and Dominic's surviving loyal soldiers slowly emerged from behind the bar, their weapons trained on the remaining 3 Rossi men, who took one look at Dominic standing amidst the carnage and immediately dropped their guns, falling to their knees with their hands raised. But Dominic didn't look at them. His eyes were locked on the far end of the ballroom. Backed against the shattered glass of the terrace doors, illuminated by the flashing red and blue police sirens arriving on the street far below, stood Gabriel. His bespoke tuxedo was torn and heavily stained with soot. His face was pale, his eyes wide and manic as he looked wildly around the room. He realized in a matter of seconds that his meticulously planned massacre, his encrypted communications, and his perfect geometric trap had been completely eradicated. Dominic slowly walked toward his brother. He didn't run. He didn't yell. His posture radiated the cold, terrifying finality of a king approaching a traitor. Victoria followed a few paces behind, unable to look away, the adrenaline still singing in her veins. "You brought a university professor to decode my letters," Gabriel spat, coughing on the thick dust as he leaned against the shattered doorframe. A hysterical, broken laugh escaped his lips. He looked past Dominic, his venomous gaze locking onto Victoria. "But you brought a goddamn prodigy to a gunfight. That was your mistake, Dominic. You always cheat." "You broke the oath, Gabriel," Dominic said. His voice was terrifyingly calm, completely devoid of anger, sorrow, or brotherly affection. It was the voice of the underworld's judge and jury. "You conspired with the Rossi syndicate. You tried to burn the family commission. You tried to kill me." "You've held the throne too long," Gabriel yelled, stepping forward, his hands empty, but his face twisted in desperate rage. "You run this family like a Wall Street corporation. We are Castellanos. We take what we want in blood, not in boardrooms. I was taking it back." Dominic raised his Glock, leveling the barrel directly between his younger brother's eyes. The entire room held its collective breath. Not a single soldier moved. Victoria gripped the edge of a flipped table, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knew what the rules of this dark world demanded. Treason, regardless of bloodline, was paid for with a bullet. "Blood is exactly what you'll choke on, little brother," Dominic whispered softly. The gunshot rang out, singular, deafening and absolute. Gabriel slumped backward, the force of the impact shattering the remaining pane of glass in the terrace doors as his body fell out onto the balcony, motionless beneath the Chicago rain. Dominic stood perfectly still for a long, heavy moment. Thin grey smoke curled lazily from the barrel of his gun. He slowly lowered the weapon, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He turned his back on his brother's body, sweeping his gaze across the ruined ballroom until his charcoal eyes locked onto Victoria. The king had defended his crown and ruthlessly purged the treason from his court. But as he walked through the wreckage towards the shivering, brilliant woman in the torn emerald dress, it was undeniably clear to everyone in the room that the balance of power in Chicago had permanently shifted. Dominic Castellano was still the undisputed boss, but he had just found his queen. The ride back to the Lake Forest estate was completely devoid of sound, save for the hypnotic, rhythmic thrum of the armored Cadillac's tires cutting through the torrential Chicago rain. The storm had broken just as the police sirens began wailing in the distance, washing the blood from the asphalt of the Gold Coast. Inside the heavily tinted SUV, Victoria sat rigid against the leather seats, staring blankly at the dark cityscape blurring past the window. The adrenaline that had fueled her brilliant, lethal calculations in the ballroom was finally beginning to crash, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. Her ears were still ringing with the singular, deafening echo of Dominic executing Gabriel. It was a sound that would undoubtedly haunt her for the rest of her life. Yet, underneath the shock, underneath the primal terror of the night, a strange, dark ember of pride was glowing in her chest. She had not panicked. She had not hidden. When the most dangerous men in the city were blinded by chaos, she had seen the invisible lines of the board and checkmated a king. When they finally arrived at the labyrinthine Gothic mansion, the heavy iron gates closing behind them felt less like the locking of a prison and more like the sealing of a fortress. Victoria was immediately escorted to the master suite's adjoining library. The room was a sanctuary of old wealth, floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves filled with rare first editions, the air thick with the scent of aged paper, expensive leather, and the faint trace of Dominic's sandalwood cologne. A massive stone fireplace crackled to life, casting long, dancing shadows across the Persian rugs. She had scrubbed the soot, the plaster, and the microscopic flecks of violence from her skin in the sprawling marble shower. Now, stripped of the ruined, blood-spattered emerald gown, she sat curled in a deep leather armchair, swallowed up by one of Dominic's oversized, charcoal-grey cashmere sweaters. She stared into the fire, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped them around a crystal glass of water. The heavy oak doors clicked open. Dominic stepped into the firelight. He had shed the remnants of his tuxedo. He wore dark, tailored slacks and a black, long-sleeved Henley that clung to the hard, scarred lines of his chest and arms. His dark hair was still damp from the rain, and his face was an unreadable, chiseled mask of stone. A man who had just put a bullet between his own brother's eyes should look broken. But Dominic Castellano merely looked like a king who had survived a coup, exhausted, cold, and utterly untouchable. He didn't speak. He walked quietly to a side table, poured 2 fingers of neat, aged bourbon into a glass, and then picked up a small, black leather medical kit. Moving with a slow, deliberate grace, Dominic knelt directly onto the Persian rug in front of Victoria's armchair. He set the bourbon on the side table near her water glass, then gently, almost reverently, lifted her right foot, resting her ankle on his knee. Victoria hissed softly, her muscles tensing. In the frantic sprint across the ruined ballroom, she had kicked off her heels, and the shattered crystal of the chandelier had sliced into the soles of her feet. She hadn't even felt it, until the adrenaline wore off. "I can do that," Victoria murmured, her voice raspy, the first word spoken between them since the hotel. "Let me," Dominic commanded softly. The juxtaposition was staggering. These were the exact same hands that, less than an hour ago, had held a Glock 19 and mercilessly dismantled 6 heavily armed assassins in total darkness. Yet, as he applied an antiseptic wipe to the shallow cuts on her skin, his touch was incredibly light, meticulous, and breathtakingly gentle. He worked in absolute silence, carefully extracting a microscopic sliver of glass with a pair of silver tweezers before wrapping her foot in clean white gauze. The intimacy of the act in the quiet, firelit room was overwhelming. He was treating her not like a pawn, not like an employee, but like something infinitely precious. Once he was finished with both feet, Dominic sat back on his heels. He didn't stand up. He remained kneeling before her, his charcoal grey eyes slowly rising to meet hers. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy with unsaid words and the lingering electric hum of survival. "I owe you my life, Victoria," Dominic finally said, his deep, velvety baritone scraping against the quiet of the library. "And I owe you my empire. You saw what none of my capos, none of my seasoned tacticians could see. You didn't just decode the paper. You decoded the man. You decoded the battlefield." He broke eye contact, standing up in one fluid motion. He walked over to his heavy mahogany desk, reaching behind the carved wood. When he turned back, he was holding the heavy canvas duffel bag. He walked back to her and dropped it onto the rug at her feet. It landed with a heavy, muted thud that vibrated through the floorboards. $1 million in unmarked, non-sequential $100 bills. "The wager is fulfilled," Dominic stated, his voice flattening into a strictly business cadence, though a muscle feathered furiously along his jawline. "Your father's debt is erased. Completely. That money is yours, free and clear." Victoria stared at the canvas bag. Just 24 hours ago, that bag represented the absolute pinnacle of her wildest dreams. It was her salvation. It was the key to unlocking the heavy, suffocating chain her father had left wrapped around her neck. "Leo has a private jet, fueled and waiting on the tarmac at O'Hare," Dominic continued, his eyes locked onto her face, tracking every micro-expression. "It has clearance to take you anywhere in the world. London, Paris, Zurich. There is a diplomatic passport in that bag with a new name, matching a completely clean, untraceable Swiss bank account. You will have 24-hour security details shadowing you from a distance until you feel safe. You never have to look over your shoulder, Victoria. And you never have to serve another drink to men who don't deserve to breathe the same air as you." Victoria looked from the bag up to the towering Mafia boss. He was offering her an absolute, flawless exit. It was a ghost protocol. Complete freedom. But as she looked at him, standing in the shadows of his fortress, a terrifying realization washed over her. The gilded cage didn't feel like a prison anymore. The outside world, with its mundane struggles, quiet coffee shops, and predictable, safe routines, suddenly felt impossibly grey, dull, and lifeless compared to the electric, vibrant danger of standing by his side. She remembered the absolute darkness of the ballroom. She remembered the way he had shielded her with his own body without a second thought. But more than that, she remembered the dark thrill of him following her commands. He had trusted her brilliant mind completely, turning her intellect into the deadliest weapon in the room. He didn't just want her for her body or pity her for her debt. He revered her brain. $1 million to walk away, Victoria said softly, picking up the glass of bourbon he had poured and taking a slow, burning sip. "Yes," Dominic said. His hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides. He was offering her the door, but every rigid line of his powerful body screamed that he wanted to lock it and throw away the key. Victoria set the crystal glass down. She pushed herself out of the leather armchair, the oversized cashmere sweater falling to mid-thigh. She ignored the dull, throbbing ache in her bandaged feet as she slowly closed the distance between them. She stopped mere inches from his chest, tilting her head back to meet his piercing, stormy gaze. "What if I don't want the jet, Dominic?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that nonetheless commanded the entire room. "What if I don't want to walk away?" Dominic's breath hitched, a sharp, ragged intake of air. His eyes darkened to the color of a midnight ocean. Victoria, you don't know what you're saying. You are coming down from shock. This life, my world. It is built on blood, paranoia, and violence. It is cold. You are a brilliant, beautiful light. If you stay, I will inevitably pull you into the dark with me. I navigated the dark for you tonight, she countered fiercely, taking the final half-step forward so her body was practically brushing his. She reached up, placing both her hands flat against the hard, warm expanse of his chest. She could feel his heart hammering wildly beneath her palms, betraying his stoic facade. I don't need protecting, Dominic. I survived my father's ruin, and I survived your brother's massacre. I don't want a quiet life in Zurich. I want a partner who sees my mind as a weapon, not a parlor trick. A low, guttural groan tore from the back of Dominic's throat. The ironclad restraint he had maintained all night, finally, spectacularly, shattered. His large hands came up, framing her face with a desperate, terrifyingly possessive grip. His thumbs swept fiercely across her cheekbones. "If you stay," he warned, his voice thick with raw, unrestrained emotion, leaning down until his lips were a millimeter from hers. "There is no walking away. Not tomorrow. Not in 10 years. Ever. You will be my cryptographer, my closest confidant, and you will be mine, in every conceivable sense of the word. I will burn down anyone who tries to take you from me, Victoria. Then let Chicago burn," she whispered against his lips. Dominic's mouth crashed down onto hers. The kiss was explosive, a violent collision of tasting bourbon, adrenaline, profound relief, and a fierce, untamed passion. It was a claim of ownership, a binding promise, and a mutual surrender all at once. Victoria tangled her fingers into his dark hair, pulling him closer, anchoring herself to the most dangerous man in the city. She had walked into the Obsidian Club as a waitress, drowning in a dead man's debt. She had ended the night as the architect of a Mafia empire. She had cracked the devil's cipher to save her own life, but in the ashes of the aftermath, she had decoded the only thing that mattered, his heart. And that was a dangerous, $1,000,000 secret she intended to keep forever. And just like that, a $1,000,000 dare over a cryptic letter changed the Chicago underworld forever. Victoria didn't just survive the deadly crossfire of the Castellano family. She completely rewrote the rules. She proved that the sharpest weapon in a room full of ruthless mobsters isn't a gun, but a brilliant mind. Dominic found the one woman who could not only decode his enemy's darkest secrets, but also unlock his heavily guarded heart. What started as a twisted game of survival ended in the ultimate romance, proving that the most dangerous risk of all is falling in love. If Victoria and Dominic's thrilling story kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our explosive, real-life drama stories. Share this video with your fellow Mafia romance fans and drop a comment below. Would you have taken the $1,000,000 and run, or stayed to rule the empire with Dominic? Thanks for watching.